Have you ever felt it? That subtle shift in the air? The moment when someone you've known your whole life, someone you've loved and trusted, says something that makes you see them completely differently? That happened to me, and I still remember the look in his eyes when he said it. But before I tell you everything, I want to know something about you. Where are you listening from? Which city, which town, which quiet little corner of the world are you sitting in right now, hearing my story? Because what I'm about to share could unfold anywhere. Maybe it has, maybe in some way it already has. For you, my name is Eleanor, though most people who know me well call me Nell, and this story begins on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. In my small white house outside a sleepy town in coastal Georgia, the sun was pouring through my lace curtains, turning the dust in the air to glitter. I had a pot of chamomile tea just starting to simmer on the stove. On the dining table beside me, there was a basket of clean laundry, soft towels, a pair of old flannel pajamas, and a faded navy sweatshirt my grandson Daniel had left behind on his last visit. I was folding that sweatshirt when I heard the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. My neighbor, Louise, always called before coming over. The mailman never bothered with the door. For a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Then it came again, 3 firm, hopeful taps. I set down the laundry, wiped my hands on my apron, and went to the door. When I opened it, there he was, Daniel, 28 years old now, tall, lean, with that easy posture that always reminded me of his late grandfather. His dark hair was a little too long, curling at the edges. He held a small bouquet of wild daisies in one hand and wore a crooked, boyish grin that sent a warmth rushing straight through me. "Hey, Nana Elle," he said, using the nickname he'd given me when he was 3, and couldn't quite say Eleanor. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything. I was in town and thought, maybe you'd like some company." Oh, how my heart softened at the sound of his voice. "You could never interrupt," I told him, taking the flowers from his hand. "You know my door is always open to you. Come in, sweetheart." He stepped inside and paused in the living room, taking in the familiar surroundings like he always did. His gaze moved slowly across the shelves lined with framed photos, family gatherings, birthdays, fishing trips at the lake. He stopped at a picture of himself at 4 years old, cheeks round and sandy, sitting on my lap at the beach while I held a plastic shovel, and laughed at something he'd said. "I can't believe I was ever this tiny," he murmured, a quiet laugh in his chest. "Oh, you were smaller than that," I said, putting the daisies into a glass jar I used for flowers, "and twice as stubborn." He chuckled and sank into the old green armchair by the window, the one his grandfather used to claim every Sunday afternoon. The way Daniel settled into it, shoulders dropping, legs stretching out, told me everything. In that chair, in this house, he didn't have to perform. He didn't have to impress anyone. He could just be. We spent the next hour, like we always did, drifting in and out of conversation. He told me about his job in Savannah, about the cramped apartment he shared with a friend, about a woman he'd been seeing, a kind, quiet girl, though he admitted he wasn't sure how he really felt about her. I listened the way a grandmother learns to listen, not as a judge, not as a critic, but as a safe landing place. I offered a few knowing looks and a gentle question here and there, but mostly I let him talk. When the tea was ready, I poured us each a cup, and we carried them out to the front porch. The sun was lowering in the sky, staining everything in shades of gold and peach. The worst heat of the day had passed, and the air was soft, carrying the distant hum of cicadas waking up for the night. It was one of those evenings you wish you could fold up and tuck into your pocket just to revisit on the hard days. That's when it happened. Daniel turned toward me, his expression suddenly serious in a way I wasn't used to seeing on his face. He held his mug with both hands, turning it slightly, as if he needed something to anchor him. "Nana," he said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" I studied him for a moment. I could feel something gathering, like a storm behind his eyes. "Of course," I said softly. "You can ask me anything." He looked away out over the front yard where the grass was still catching the last light. His thumb traced the rim of his cup. When he looked back at me, his eyes were softer, a little more vulnerable. "Have you ever been lonely?" he asked. "I mean, really lonely. The kind that sits with you even when you're not alone." The question rang through me like a bell struck in an empty church, not because it was inappropriate, because it was honest, raw, and I could tell it wasn't coming from nowhere. It was coming from somewhere deep inside him. I swallowed. My fingers tightened just slightly around my cup. Yes, I answered after a long breath, more times than I'd care to admit. We let the silence stretch between us. It wasn't an empty silence. It was full of memory, of invisible threads, of things neither of us had said yet. He nodded slowly, like my answer had unlocked something. "I've been feeling that a lot lately," he said finally. "That kind of quiet inside. I think that's why I drove out here. I needed to be around someone who understands what that kind of silence feels like." I reached over and set my hand over his. His skin was warm, familiar, and I could feel the slight tremor beneath the surface. "I understand more than you know," I told him. He looked down at our hands, and he didn't pull away. That was the moment the air shifted. Nothing was spoken that shouldn't have been, yet something changed. Something gentle and unnamed passed between us. Not improper, not explicit, just tender, a different kind of closeness I hadn't expected to feel with him. And suddenly, that ordinary Tuesday evening didn't feel ordinary anymore. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. For a split second, as I blinked my way into consciousness, I was back in another time, hearing the familiar clink of spoons, feeling the presence of my husband Mark, moving around the kitchen like he always did before dawn. Then I remembered. I slid on my robe and padded down the hallway. There was a soft humming, the sound of a cabinet closing. When I stepped into the kitchen, I stopped in the doorway. Daniel was at the stove, barefoot, bare-chested, wearing only plaid pajama pants and a look of mild embarrassment. "Morning, Nana L," he said, that shy, almost boyish smile returning. "Hope you don't mind. I, remembered you take your coffee with a little cream and just a touch of sugar. Found everything in the same place." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just watched him move around my kitchen like he belonged there, like he'd been doing this for years. The sight of him in that familiar space, the broad line of his back, the way he reached instinctively for the mugs in the right cabinet, sent a flutter through me. I wasn't prepared for, not desire, not exactly, something else, a sense of having fallen into a life I'd once lived and thought I'd never touch again. "You remembered right," I said, making sure my voice stayed steady as I walked to the table. "And I'll tell you now, I didn't expect to wake up to a handsome young man making my coffee again." He laughed under his breath, poured the coffee, and set the mug carefully in front of me before sitting down across the table. The quiet between us had changed. It wasn't uncomfortable at all. If anything, it felt charged, but not in a loud way, in a deep, subtle way, like both of us were aware of something unsaid, and neither of us was quite sure what to do with it. He looked at me over the rim of his cup, and I saw the question lingering there, the same one he'd asked the night before. "Have you ever been lonely?" I saw my own answer reflected back at me. We didn't bring it up again, not yet. Instead, we talked about small things. The tomatoes in the backyard that weren't doing well this year. The squirrel that had been stealing my birdseed. He offered to help me replant my garden. Said he'd stay a day or two if I didn't mind. I don't know why that simple offer made my throat tighten. Maybe it was his tone. Maybe it was the way he said it, like it mattered, to him, that my garden thrived. Later that afternoon, when the sun was high and the house had settled into its familiar creaks, I found myself in the den, pulling old photo albums from the bottom shelf. Dust rose in faint clouds as I opened them. Daniel came in quietly and sat beside me on the couch. Our shoulders brushed. That small contact startled me, not because it was new, but because I was suddenly aware of it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying the photos. There I was, decades younger, standing in a sunlit field with Mark, my arms looped around his waist. There we were on a picnic blanket, my hair tucked under a scarf, my face flushed from laughing too hard. There we were at Christmas, dancing in the living room, my cheek pressed against his shoulder. "You were always smiling," Daniel said quietly, pointing to a photo of me and Mark sitting on the hood of his old truck. You looked really happy. I replied. We had our storms, but he loved me in a way that never made me doubt myself, not once. When I said that, Daniel turned his head and looked at me. Really looked. There was an intensity in his gaze that made my hands still on the album pages. You still deserve to be loved like that, he said softly. My breath caught. I didn't know how to answer. His words felt too close to something I'd kept carefully folded and hidden away for years. I closed the album gently and set it on the coffee table. I stood up, needing space I couldn't quite explain. But when I stepped away, he rose too. Nana, he stopped himself. His jaw worked for a moment. Eleanor. Something in me flinched at the sound of my name in his voice. It sounded different. Intimate, adult. He reached out and lightly caught my wrist, not gripping, just touching. I meant what I said yesterday, he murmured. About why I came. I've been feeling things I don't know how to carry. About my life, about connection, about what it really means to belong to someone. His words weren't rushed. He wasn't pleading. He was stating something he'd been wrestling with quietly, probably for months. I knew I should have redirected the conversation. I should have told him he was tired, or lonely, or going through something that would pass. I should have reminded him of the roles we held in each other's lives. But I didn't. Instead, I lifted my eyes to his, and the space between us seemed to shrink. I know exactly what you mean, I whispered. Neither of us moved. The air between us felt thick, like it had a texture, like if I reached out, my fingers would come back dusted in it. There was no wild rush, no dramatic confession. Just a realization quietly blooming in the dark. We were both yearning for something we didn't have a name for yet. I don't want you to feel alone, he said eventually. Not if I can help it. And I don't want you to be confused, I managed. I'm not confused, he said, holding my gaze. Not about how I feel when I'm here, when I'm with you. I'm 76 years old. I have buried a husband, raised children, comforted friends, outlived nearly everyone I thought I'd grow old with. I've seen grief carve a hollow in people and watched them fill it with whatever they could find, but nothing in my life prepared me for the look in my grandson's eyes in that moment. It wasn't lust. It wasn't a boyish crush. It was something else. The ache of wanting to be truly seen by someone who knew his history, his scars, his failures, his kindness. And to my quiet shame, and even quieter relief, I recognized that same ache in myself. We didn't say anything else about it that evening. He cooked dinner, chopping onions in my kitchen like he'd been doing it for years, and I sat on the porch, watching the sky turn from blue to lavender. My thoughts came and went like waves, carrying questions I couldn't quite grab hold of. After we ate, we sat outside with our plates on our laps, listening to the hum of summer insects and the distant bark of a dog. When it was time for bed, he paused at the end of the hallway, one hand resting on his doorframe. Can we talk more tomorrow? He asked. Yes, I said, we can. Good night, Elle, he said, softly. Good night, Daniel. That night, sleep came late. I lay on my back, staring at the faint pattern on the ceiling. The words he'd said replayed in my mind over and over. You still deserve to be loved like that. I hadn't let myself believe that for a very long time. Somewhere along the way, I had quietly decided that kind of love was behind me, that my days of being held, being cherished as someone's center were over, that my role now was to be steady, wise, available, but not desired, not chosen, and yet, there I was, an old woman with thinning hair and aching knees, feeling something stir in me I thought had gone to sleep for good. The next day unfolded with a strange gentleness, like even the house knew something delicate was growing and didn't want to startle it. Daniel slept late. I didn't wake him. Instead, I stood in the kitchen kneading bread dough I hadn't planned to make. I pressed my hands into the soft, yielding surface over and over, as though I could work my confusion out through my fingers. By the time he shuffled in, hair mussed, eyes still half closed, the dough was resting and the oven was warming. Smells like a bakery in here, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. What are you making? Just bread, I answered, wiping a bit of flour from my cheek. Thought I'd give my hand something to do. He came to stand beside me at the counter, close, closer than necessary, close enough that I could feel his body heat along my arm. He noticed the way my breath hitched. I know he did, but he didn't comment. Instead, he glanced at the doe, then at me. "You want to go for a drive later?" he asked. "Out to the lake, maybe? We haven't been there in years." I hesitated, then nodded. That would be nice. So after lunch, we packed a small basket, grapes, slices of sharp cheddar, leftover bread still warm, and a thermos of cold tea. We drove the old county road that curved past the fields and dense pines, heading toward the lake where I had taken him fishing when he was still small enough to sit in my lap. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on his knee. He didn't talk much. Every now and then, he'd glance over at me, like he wanted to say something, and then decided against it. We arrived just as the sun began its slow slide downward. The water was smooth as glass, broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish near the surface. The light danced on it in gold fragments. The wooden bench by the shore was empty, weathered by years of sun and rain. We sat side by side, our knees almost touching. The basket sat on the ground between us. The quiet there was different from the quiet of my house. It felt like a place that could hold secrets without ever repeating them. After a long stretch of silence, he spoke. "I used to think love had rules," he said. I turned my head slightly, watching his profile. "Rules?" "Yeah," he shrugged. "Like it had to look a certain way, be between certain kinds of people, happen at a certain age, follow all the expectations." He picked up a small stone and skipped it across the surface of the water. 1, 2 skips, then it sank. "But lately," he went on, "I'm starting to think love doesn't really care about those rules. It shows up where it wants to." He was still looking at the water, but his words were pointed somewhere else. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I could. "I'm not saying this to confuse you," he said. "I know this sounds strange, maybe even wrong. But when I'm here with you, I don't feel like I'm sitting next to my grandmother." He said the word like it didn't quite fit. "I feel like I'm sitting next to someone who understands me in a way no one else ever has, and that matters to me more than I know how to explain." My heart clenched. I opened my mouth to tell him he was lonely, to say he was grateful, that he admired me, that he was mixing up gratitude and devotion and nostalgia with something else. I wanted to tell him this would pass, but the truth was, I couldn't bring myself to lie, because somewhere deep inside, I'd felt it too. That strange sense of being seen, not as a role, not as a title, but as a person, a woman, a soul. "You've grown into a man," I said quietly, "and you've learned to look at people not just through labels, but as they really are. That's not a small thing." Our shoulders brushed lightly. Neither of us moved away. "I don't want to cross any lines," he said. His voice was small, almost careful. I needed to say it. Being with you like this feels right to me, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else." I turned to face him for a moment. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't trying to convince me of anything. He was simply offering the truth of his heart, uncertain what I would do with it. "I never thought I'd hear something like that from you," I admitted. "Not in this lifetime." I looked back out at the water, at the sun slowly relaxing into the horizon. "But I also never thought I'd feel something wake up in me again," I added. "At this age, in this way, you remind me that I'm still here, that I'm not just someone who loved once long ago, but someone who still can." I reached out slowly and took his hand. "You've always had such a gentle spirit," I whispered. "Even as a boy, I saw it in you back then. But what I'm feeling now," I paused, choosing my words carefully. "It's different, and I don't know what to do with it." "We don't have to do anything with it," he said, a quiet assurance in his tone. "I just want to be here with you, however you'll let me." We sat that way as the sky went from gold to pink to violet. The air cooled. The first stars appeared. Neither of us tried to explain what was happening. We just let it be. When we drove back to the house, the world had dimmed into blues and grays. I lit a few candles in the living room to hold back the dark. He helped me assemble a simple dinner, and we ate softly, without the need for constant conversation. Later, we drifted back to the couch. The photo album from the other day still lay open on the coffee table, turned to a page where Mark and I were dancing in the kitchen, my head thrown back laughing. Daniel didn't say anything. He just sat down next to me and, after a moment, rested his head gently against my shoulder. I shouldn't have allowed it, I knew that. But feeling the weight of his head there, the warmth of him at my side, didn't feel like breaking something sacred. It felt like returning to it. We stayed like that, quiet, the sound of the ticking clock in the corner marking the minutes. When he finally stood up to go to bed, he turned back at the doorway. "I'm really glad I came," he said. "So am I answered. When the house went still again and I found myself alone in my bedroom, I sat in the old rocker by the window and looked out at the dark garden. The feelings inside me had grown from a soft stir to something with edges and weight. What do you call it when two souls find refuge in each other, even when the world would condemn it? Is it wrong? Is it an accident? Is it simply human? I didn't know, but I knew the question wasn't going anywhere. The next morning I woke before the sun. The house was wrapped in that pale, sacred quiet that comes just before the day begins. I slipped my arms into my robe and walked down the hallway. I paused outside the guest room door for a moment. I could hear the gentle rhythm of his breathing on the other side. Part of me wanted to knock. Another part of me wanted to turn around and leave things just as they were, for one more hour, at least. By the time he came into the kitchen, I'd already steeped the tea and set our cups on the table. "Morning, Nana L," he said softly. "Good morning, love," I replied, the words coming out more tender than I intended. We sat together for a while, saying nothing, letting the warmth of the tea and the quiet of the morning wrap around us. Finally, he set his cup down. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted. "Neither did I said. "I've been thinking," he went on, "about us, about whatever is happening between us. I know we can't just name it like it's simple, but I don't want to pretend it isn't real." I stared into my tea as the steam curled upward, dissolving into the air. "I've spent so many years putting parts of myself away," I said slowly. "After your grandfather died, I told myself that chapter was over. The chapter where I'm held, where I'm chosen." I swallowed. I thought women my age were supposed to fold those needs up and tuck them behind their good sense. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was gentle but certain. "You don't have to keep hiding that part of yourself," he said. Tears stung my eyes. I hated how exposed I felt, but I hated more how familiar the loneliness was. "I didn't think I'd ever feel close to anyone again this way," I admitted. "Not like this, not with anyone." He squeezed my hand. "You're not alone," he said. "Not anymore. Not if I have anything to say about it." We didn't rush to define anything. The day unfolded in slow movements. We went out to the garden. The soil was a little dry, the tomato plants sagging on their stakes. He pulled on an old pair of work gloves and knelt beside me in the dirt. We weeded in companionable silence, our hands working the earth, our shoulders sometimes brushing. We laughed when the hose slipped out of my grip and sprayed his shirt. He pretended to protest, then turned the hose on me in retaliation. The sound of our laughter rose into the warm afternoon and made me feel, for a moment, years younger. There's something about putting your hands in the soil that makes truth easier to live with. It reminds you everything changes. Everything grows toward light if you let it. That night, after dinner, the air outside had cooled. I slipped a light cardigan around my shoulders and stepped out onto the porch. The moon hung low and bright over the treetops, casting the yard in silver. I heard the door open behind me. Daniel came out and leaned against the railing a few feet away. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead," I replied. He stared out into the dark, his fingers tapping lightly on the wooden rail. "If things were different," he began slowly, "if I weren't your grandson, would you feel the same way you do now?" The question landed in the space between us and stayed there. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because the truth felt heavy. "Yes," I said at last, "I would." He turned his head, searching my face. "I don't think it's wrong to love someone who loves you back," he said quietly, "even if no one else would ever understand it." I took a slow breath. "The world doesn't have to understand everything," I replied. Some things belong to the people who feel them and no one else. We stayed there like that, listening to the night sounds, the crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog. There was no urgency now, no scramble to categorize what we were, just a shared awareness of a deep and complicated tenderness. Eventually, we sat together on the old porch swing. He slipped his arm carefully around my shoulders, and I let my head rest against him. The swing moved gently back and forth, wood creaking softly with each motion. The scent of honeysuckle drifted in from the fence line. Time felt different in that moment, stretched, thin, and held still all at once. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, I thought, though I didn't say it aloud. I don't know what name we'll ever give this, or if we'll dare name it at all. But I did know this. Love doesn't always arrive the way people say it should. It doesn't always come with trumpets and approval, wrapped neatly in acceptable forms. Sometimes it comes quietly, on an ordinary afternoon, wearing muddy shoes and carrying your favorite flowers. Sometimes it comes years too late and exactly on time. And once you have felt it, once you've recognized it, you can't pretend you haven't. The next day, reality began to press in. We were sitting at the kitchen table, finishing breakfast, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his mother, my daughter. He silenced it quickly, but not before I saw the name. You should call her back, I said. She worries. He nodded, stood, and walked to the far end of the porch to return her call. I stayed where I was, listening to the muffled rise and fall of his voice. Every now and then I caught a stray word. Work, fine, just visiting. When he came back in, there was a new weight in his expression. I should probably head back tomorrow, he said. They're expecting me. I knew this moment would come. The world beyond my front yard hadn't vanished just because we'd found something quiet and rare inside it. I figured as much, I answered, trying to sound calm. You have a life, Daniel, responsibilities. People who need you. He looked at me for a long time. So do you, he said. You have me. My chest tightened. After lunch, we walked down the old dirt path behind the house, the one that led to the little clearing where Mark and I used to sit under the oaks. The light filtered through the leaves in shifting patterns. We didn't fill the silence with talk. We just walked side by side until we reached the old stump that had become an unofficial bench over the years. We sat. I know we can't live in this, Daniel said at last, gesturing vaguely between us. Not in the way I wish we could. There's too much tied to who we are to each other. I nodded. The truth of it was undeniable. But I also know, he continued, that what I feel when I'm with you is real, and it's not going to disappear just because I drive away tomorrow. He took a slow breath. So maybe this doesn't have to be about what we can't be. Maybe it can be about what we are allowed to be. I looked at him. And what do you think that is? He turned toward me, his eyes clear, steady. We are two people who love each other more deeply than most, he said. We are family. We're also two souls who found a kind of companionship that's rare. We don't have to break anything sacred to honor that. We don't have to cross lines we can't uncross. We just have to be honest with ourselves. And kind. For a moment I saw him not as my grandson, not as the little boy who used to chase fireflies in my yard, but as a man brave enough to admit what he felt, and wise enough not to demand what the world could not give. I don't want you to carry this as a shame, I said. Not now, not ever. Whatever this is between us, I want it to make you gentler with yourself, not harsher. He nodded. The same goes for you, he said. I don't want you to feel like you did something wrong just because your heart woke up again. We sat in that clearing until the sun slipped lower and the shadows grew longer. Then we rose, walked back to the house, and made dinner together. That final night, we didn't say much. We played cards at the kitchen table. We laughed when he lost 3 games in a row and blamed the deck. We washed the dishes side by side, hands moving in easy rhythm. When it was time to say goodnight, he hugged me at the bottom of the hallway, holding on a little longer than usual. Thank you, he whispered, for all of it. Thank you, I answered, for coming when you did. The next morning, he loaded his bag into the trunk of his car. The daisies he'd brought me on that first day had begun to droop in their jar on the windowsill. We stood by the front steps, the gravel crunching under his shoes. "I'll call you when I get home," he said. "I'll be here," I replied. He hesitated, then stepped forward and cupped my face gently with both hands. He pressed his forehead to mine, eyes closed. It was not a lover's gesture. It was something older, deeper. A blessing, a promise, and a goodbye all layered together. "I love you," he said. "I know," I answered, "and I love you." He pulled away, climbed into the car, and drove down the long dirt road until the dust rose and the trees swallowed him. When the sound of his engine finally faded, the quiet settled over the house again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. I went back inside, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat at the table where he had sat for the past few mornings. The chair across from me was empty now, but it still held his shape in my mind. I thought about rules, about roles, about what the world would say if it knew every detail of these days. And then I thought about something else. I thought about how many people go their whole lives never feeling truly seen, never feeling held, even for a moment, in the tender and unwavering gaze of another soul who understands them. I thought about how long I had been lonely without admitting it, even to myself. Here is what I decided, sitting at that old wooden table. What happened between Daniel and me was not simple. It was not neat or easy to define. It was, in many ways, impossible. And yet, beneath all the layers that would make other people flinch, there was something pure. Two lonely hearts recognizing each other. We did not become something we shouldn't. We did not step over the edge that would fracture more than it could ever heal. But we did allow ourselves to feel seen. We did allow ourselves to know that, even at 76, my heart could still open. That love, in its many complicated forms, hadn't abandoned me after all. What we shared won't be written in any family history. It won't be spoken aloud at holidays or toasted at dinners. It will live quietly in the spaces between our phone calls. In the way his voice softens when he asks how I'm really doing, in the way I listen for him in every unexpected knock at the door. Love doesn't always look like romance. Sometimes it arrives wearing a forbidden shape, only to reveal the core of something else, a fierce, tender, unwavering care that chooses restraint instead of indulgence, reverence instead of possession. Sometimes love shows up at your doorstep with a bunch of daisies and a question you never expected to hear. And once you've felt it, once it has brushed against the part of you that thought it was long asleep, you cannot unfeel it, but you can choose what you do with it. So if you're listening to this from a city apartment or a farmhouse by a dusty road, if you know what it is to ache quietly, to sit in a room and feel unseen, I want you to hear this. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not unworthy of being known deeply and without flinching. Love may not come in the shape you were taught to expect. It may not announce itself with flowers and perfect timing. It might arrive tangled, complicated, even impossible. But when it does, you will recognize it by this. For a moment, you will feel less alone in the world. And that, in its own quiet way, is enough.